I've got.
Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us to the Online Communist Forum. Tonight, we're taking a closer look at the war in Lebanon and the Israeli terror attack on the Hezbollah there. Jack Connor will be giving an introduction from the PCC, Provisional Central Committee of the CPGB, and afterwards we are, as always, open for questions and comments.
Thank you, Tina. Well, what can you say? The attacks on Lebanon were certainly spectaculars, and clearly that's what was intended. First of all, pagers. Why pagers? Well, we all know the story, because mobile phones can be traced, mobile phones can be used to target you in terms of missiles, drones, whatever. And then on top of that, adding to the horror, we actually had walkie-talkies exploding. Now, various journalists have looked into the origins of this. Hungarian company has been named. I've heard other reports about Bulgarian company. In terms of the origin of the actual tech, it's clearly old stuff, and I think it's Japanese. Either way, it's clear that at some point Mossad brought up a load of pagers and a load of walkie-talkies, was able to channel them in the direction of what we're always told is a terrorist organization, and therefore, cannot deal with companies, I would guess, from Europe or Japan or other such countries in a direct way. And of course, inserted explosive devices. And again, stories I've read vary about Israel actually individually contacting its targets. I'm skeptical simply because they went off so close to each other. And if we look at those who were injured or killed, it includes wives, it includes children, it includes, doesn't it, the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. Either way, surgeons say that they've had to deal with 2,000 people. That will be people who have been blinded or suffering brain injury from a blast, or the thing has gone off in their pocket. So it'd be injuries to the leg, to the groin. I think something like 40, 50 people have died. One would expect a few more to die. But in terms of those that have been taken out of action, it represents, a significant blow to Hezbollah. Not a deadly blow, but nonetheless a significant blow. But the main point about it surely is it's not how many they killed, it's the spreading of terror. It's the spreading of, what is called shock and awe. You've got a situation in Lebanon, certainly that would be the case amongst Hezbollah fighters and people in the Hezbollah movement, of worries about I don't know, solar panels, anything electronic. Is it about to explode? And that's a real concern. I have to say that in terms of this particular operation, while it conveyed shock and awe, there's nothing particularly high tech about it. There's nothing, hugely sophisticated. Of course, it took a state operation. But, I'm not, this is sort of tongue in cheek, but I'm not waiting, I'm not holding my breath for the British government to classify Mossad as a terrorist organization and Israel as a terror state. Clearly, that isn't going to happen. And one would guess, at least, with this umming and awing, depending on the public mood as well, Britain will continue to supply parts will continue to supply components in terms of Israel's war machine, because Britain is tied in to the United States, and the United States is tied into supplying Israel with what it needs to be the regional superpower in the Middle East. And just to make sure that nothing untoward happens, the United States has got two carrier fleets available to defend Israel. That's the Harry S. Truman and the Abraham Lincoln. And of course, you know, it's not just an aircraft carrier, it's a whole flotilla of support ships, anti-missile ships, as well as these, I would guess, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that will launch F-35s in the case, for example, if Iran retaliated using drones. But the fact of the matter is that Israel is pretty well defended, certainly when it comes to Iran, simply because of the time that a drone will take if you launch it in Iran. How long it takes to get to Israel is sufficiently long to shoot down most of them midway, certainly over Israel. And if one or two get through, that's an accident as far as Israel will be concerned. So in other words, you've got a complete asymmetry operating between Israel and its state, let alone non-state opponents. And, you know, when it comes to Israel, yes, it was hit, for example, recently, wasn't it, by a Houthi missile. And we should expect the same sort of thing that we saw last time, Israel launching off aircraft in order to strike at something that could be, you know, shown in terms of the international media as a spectacular. Okay, so what are we dealing with in terms of Israel? Well, we've had the open declaration that Israel views the northern front as now more important than the southern front. So in other words, in terms of Israel's wars of aggression, Gaza will continue, but it looks like set on opening up, I would guess, some sort of conventional war, i.e. a ground war in terms of southern Lebanon. Israel, you know, got a bloody nose last time round in Lebanon, so they'll be not keen on repeating that. Last time round, we were talking about occupation, long-term occupation, but maybe, who knows? You know, maybe Netanyahu has his eyes on the Christian population in Lebanon, doing a deal with their political parties, maybe ethnic cleansing of Lebanon, getting rid of the Muslim population in the south. Who knows? Either way, he seems determined on war, and whatever Biden, whatever Lamy, whatever Starmer, whatever Biden are saying, he seems determined to press ahead and act in the most provocative manner. And what you see on the other side, either because they're coordinated or simply because they recognize the overwhelming might of Israel when it comes to military capacity, is a holding back. So in terms of Lebanon, Hezbollah is clearly holding back. Clearly Iran is holding back. That's after, you know, Israel striking at its embassy in Damascus and carrying out an assassination in Tehran itself, the Hamas leader. The only organizations that haven't held back here is clearly Hamas itself, with the audacious October 7th attack on Israel, and the Houthis in the Red Sea, and also launching from Yemen rockets against Israel. So clearly, I'll call it Netanyahu. Netanyahu and those around him want a war. You can't say that it's simply a question of Likud, and you can't simply say it's a question of his coalition, because we have, for example, moves either afoot, but certainly publicly, talked about, of replacing the existing defense minister, who's a fellow member of Netanyahu's Likud, with someone else. And that someone else, in terms of what I've been reading, could possibly be from without the existing coalition. So I don't know whether that means a split in Likud between Netanyahu and Gallant, the present defense minister. I just don't know. Or bringing in to the existing coalition a new party. Who knows? Either way, it's Netanyahu and his closer allies, and that could include the far right. That will include actually the far right coalition partners. They seem determined on a war, and the way I read it certainly is what they're trying to do is defy Biden, lesser the chances of Harris being elected on November the 5th, and hope that it's Trump is returned for a second term. Now, that doesn't mean, if that fails, it's a disaster for Netanyahu, a disaster for Israel. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's simply that in terms of at least the rhetoric, and certainly in this context, I take it seriously, Trump is equally as aggressive as Netanyahu. He's talked about finishing the job. He's talked about taking the war to Iran. Iran is pictured as the main sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East. At least in terms of rhetoric, Trump is far more akin to Netanyahu, in spite of their previous falling out. So that's how at least it reads to me. Now, what's the logic of it? I've already spoken about the possibility of ethnic cleansing in Lebanon, the establishment of some sort of Maronite state in the south of the country. That's a possibility. But also, of course, we need to recognize that the foundation of Israel itself in 1948 was based on the idea, the project of a greater Israel, which necessitates ethnic cleansing. And given that Israel wants the whole of Mandate Palestine, that means getting rid of substantial numbers of Palestinians from the West Bank and substantial numbers of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And when it comes to the West Bank, what that means, of course, is putting people over the other side of the Jordan. And one would guess such an action would throw the existing regime, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, into crisis. Would it survive such an action? I don't know, but it's conceivable that it would collapse into the sort of chaos that we've seen in Syria, which suits Israel fine. So you've got a failed state at the moment in Lebanon, a failed state in Syria. And as far as Israel is concerned, it wouldn't be a bad thing to see a failed state in Jordan, however friendly in reality the Jordanian monarch is to Israel, and potentially, perhaps, even a failed state in Egypt. After all, if we look at the Sisi regime, yes, it's backed by the army, but clearly amongst the Egyptian masses themselves, this isn't a popular government, far from it. It's a government that rests on a very narrow social base. So what Israel brings at the moment in the Middle East is terrorism, is barbarism, is state collapse. Okay, moving to the other war. Not saying anything new here, but I do think, given its seriousness, it commands attention. And of course, what we see in Ukraine is the continued forward movement of Russian troops to Prorozhsk in the Donbass. I don't know whether Russia will take that this year. It's quite conceivable. It is an important transport hub. It would clearly open up the possibility of taking the whole of the Donbass. That's clearly what Putin is aiming for. On the other hand, in terms of this year, my guess would be there ain't that much left at the moment when it comes to fighting weather. Once the spring rains arrive, it becomes incredibly difficult. And it isn't simply about the trenches filling with mud, about a quagmire when it comes to the front line. It's supplying the front line is the difficulty. You have to supply the front line over agricultural track. And that means your lorries sink into the mud. Even tanks find it difficult to move over such territory. So your army is starved of food, of fuel, of ammunition. So generals definitely don't like fighting in the spring, and they don't like fighting in the autumn. Winter, on the other hand, so although you can read quite a few armchair generals talking about winter and how hellish it is, and it is, temperatures, really do plunge. It's continental, continental weather pattern. The fact of the matter is that is still fighting weather. Tanks can move over frozen land. Troops can move over frozen land as well. So although it's deeply, deeply unpleasant, you can still fight an effective battle. So maybe we'll see a renewed offensive in the winter. Who knows? Either way, I would comment on Kursk. So far, this incursion hasn't been surrounded. It hasn't led to a military disaster as far as Ukraine is concerned. It's led to some mutterings from armchair generals, including those in Ukraine itself. But of course, the elite forces that were deployed in order to go over the border to penetrate through, and they seem to have done it with remarkable ease. These elite forces will have long gone, would have long returned to the other front in Ukraine. And just to underline the point, it is interesting, isn't it, that various news outlets, and it doesn't surprise me, are saying that Russia, or at least Russian commanders, expected some sort of incursion like this, but clearly those above them didn't take any notice. In other words, what you had on the border when it came to the Kursk region is FSB troops and raw conscripts, and they proved no match for Ukrainian elite forces that were not only using, from what I can gather, main battle tanks, but were also using HIMARS or HIMARS. I don't know how you would pronounce it, but these are the American equivalent of Storm Shadows, but they're mobile. Storm Shadows are launched from an aircraft. HIMARS are launched from ground launchers, but Ukraine has been using them in order to take out bridges to prevent easy Russian reinforcements, and also to take out pontoon bridges that were put up again in order to move Russian reinforcements in. And what we're getting very heavily trailed in the Western press, and what I mean by that is the Anglosphere. So in terms of the British press and in terms of the American press, is story after story that's clearly coming from some sort of state force. And I'm not meaning by that Ukraine, it clearly coming from the Pentagon, at least that's my reading of it. And that's the story that Zelensky has, quote unquote, a victory plan, or quote unquote, a game changing plan. So I've read Timothy Garton Ash in The Guardian. You can read Politico. You can read the Financial Times. The list goes on and on and on. So we're talking not about the Sun or the Mail. We're talking about, how should I put it, the quality liberal press. Either way, the idea seems to be that Zelensky now isn't insisting, which was the line, on every inch of 1991 Ukrainian soil and every single Russian army personnel. All of that has to be given up. All of them have to go. That was the basis that Ukraine began this war in terms of its aims. That seems to have been quietly abandoned. And what Zelensky seems to be talking about at the moment, clearly with the say-so of the United States, is a negotiated settlement, maybe land for land, maybe some deal over Donbass, maybe some agreement on the Black Sea and Crimea. I don't know, but it does strike me that if we look at the United States, for all its rhetoric about peace, actually doesn't want peace. It knew that it was provoking war between Ukraine and Russia. It didn't do anything to stop the bombardment of Russian Ukrainian positions in the Donbass. Rockets, artillery shells, tanks were supplied, all the rest of it. And clearly, eventually, Putin took the bait. We had 2014, of course, the Maidan coup, but also we had the invasion from the north. And from an American strategic point of view, surely the aim is to finish Russia as a Black Sea power, get rid of the Crimean base, but also to get the Russian fleet out of the Black Sea itself. So yes, Crimea effectively has been abandoned as a Russian naval base. It's been shifted to the east, but get rid of that as well. And therefore, Russia only has cold ports that you can use, but only with difficulty throughout the year. So Vladivostok in the far east, Archangel in the north, Petrograd in the north, again, which can be blocked off by NATO fleets if necessary. So we need to put the Ukraine war in that context, and then, of course, as we've been arguing, also into the context of China. And while at the moment, in terms of November the 5th, presidential election, which is now only weeks away, this time we have Donald Trump talking the language of peace, about sorting the Ukraine issue out within 24 hours of being elected, not taking office, not being sworn in, but actually winning the election. He's going to sort it out. I'm extremely skeptical. Certainly once, if he's back in the White House, my conviction is that the guys from the Pentagon would come to him and say, look, Mr. President, you want to stop China, don't you? He turns around and says, yeah, I want to stop China. Well, this is how we do it. We surround China and to surround China. One way, and the way we're doing it, is to overthrow, to trigger the overthrow of the Putin regime, maybe divide up Russia into a number of different neo-colonies, or under a new Yeltsin, whatever it is, pro-American regime in Moscow. And then you've got China surrounded. So you've got China surrounded with Taiwan, with Japan, with the American fleet. You've got India on board. You've got AUKUS, and now you would have the North. Now, whether that's achievable, that's a different question. But that's how it seems to me. So what the aim is, I would guess, in terms of the Ukraine war, needs to be understood in terms of the world island, this sort of strategic idea of controlling northern Asia down to the Yangtze. And if you control that, the idea is basically you control the world. So here's the new American century. That's how it would be sold to Trump. Does he go for it? I would guess yes, simply because he recognizes the challenge from China. Unless you wanted to risk a direct war with China, an indirect war is surely preferable. It takes you longer, but it's far less risky. Meanwhile, we have at least what I view as a karabuki dance over storm shadows. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm naive. Maybe Lamy and Starmer really did go to Washington and visit Joe Biden in the White House in order to lobby him. We demand that we're allowed to give the go-ahead for the use of storm shadows. And maybe Lamy and Starmer then have been touring Europe, agitating as the lead warmonger in NATO. My reading of it is slightly different. My reading of it has been all the way through the Ukraine war is that Britain acts as, to use a phrase, the yak dog of the United States. It did it over main battle tanks. Remember was it a dozen Challenger 2s? In reality, of course, the agenda wasn't Challenger 2s, let alone a dozen of them. What difference would they make? It was Leopard 2s. It was German Leopard 2s that had been supplied in large numbers to other European powers. So what all of that was about was getting Germany on side and the rest of NATO supplying significant numbers of Leopard 2s. I mean, they are technologically, in terms of warfighting, the equivalent of Challenger 2s. I mean, I'm not going to get into which one's better. They're both fearsome machines. And again, we have America coming up as the sort of reluctant, oh shucks, we will give the go-ahead for special Abraham 2s being manufactured, which definitely aren't up to normal American top-notch standards. Either way, that was all about Leopard 2s. And we had the same karabuki dance over F-16s. Again, an American technology this time, but also standard Air Force kit for most European powers. So in terms of Germany, the Netherlands, Eastern Europe, Greece, Italy, they will be equipped with F-16s. And as we're having the transition, I think it's from fourth generation fighter bombers to fifth generation, a lot of them are spare. A lot of them can be replaced with F-35s, which is the new generation of fighter bombers. And so, yeah, supply them to Ukraine. Will it make a decisive difference? No, of course not. That's not what this is about. This is upping the ante. And in my view, at least, what it's worth, if the go-ahead has been given, and I think it has, although it hasn't been publicly announced, this isn't going to be militarily decisive. You know, what's going to be decisive at the end of the day is your ability to produce shells, your ability to produce drones, your ability to mobilize large numbers of troops. And certainly when it comes to artillery and all the rest of it, the United States and NATO can do that job. And certainly when it comes to troops, it's quite prepared to see Ukrainians die in the cause of the overthrow of Putin and the strangulation of China. Whether that succeeds and whether they will need more direct NATO involvement remains to be seen. Either way, my own assessment, again, for what it's worth, is if it falls, Prozhsk isn't going to lead to the collapse of the Ukrainian army or the Ukrainian state. This will be a blow against it, but nonetheless, certainly something that can be absorbed and dealt with in terms of establishing a new front line. So in terms of that particular approach, I disagree with Alex Kalinikos in the latest edition of Socialist Worker. He seems to view the West as losing interest in Ukraine, that this is an unwinnable war, a certain war weariness in Washington. I think that's a misreading of it. As I said, my own assessment, of Donald Trump is he talks about peace in this context. But if we put it in the context of China, I think we get a much more accurate picture of what is involved. And that's a clash fundamentally between the United States and its only serious global rival, which is China. Okay, moving on. This is on Britain. Well, what a surprise. Mohammed Fayed turns out to be the latest in a long line of scandals. He's now talked about, at least in the context of Jimmy Savile, Jeffrey Epstein, and Harvey Weinstein. So in terms of, I think it was on the BBC that ran the documentary, What's Happened to the Team of Lawyers that are working from these survivors of Mohammed Fayed, is their numbers have been greatly added to. So my understanding is that what began as 40 complaints against him grew to 100. And last time I read it, it was at 150. Now, again, in reading the accounts that have been, made available in the press, what is clear is that, of course, there are a lot more than 150 women involved, because in terms of those that used to work for Harrods, those that work for Mohammed Fayed, they report that as well as friends of theirs, who resisted the attacks of Mohammed Fayed, there were those that were prepared to be bought by him. So, for example, anecdotally, they talk about young women working in Harrods who suddenly were able to acquire a car, a flat, suddenly had a store card, suddenly had expensive jewelry. In other words, they didn't resist. They did an economic deal with Fayed, and that's what he expected off these women. And of course, those that didn't comply to his wishes, they could be threatened by his security. But crucially, surely, what the main threat wasn't from the security guys in Harrods. It was lawyers. It was Mohammed Fayed's ability to hire lots of them, to hire the best of them, and basically to take anyone who dared point the finger at him, drag them through the courts, bankrupt them. But of course, it has to be said that in terms of the legal action that is being taken by these, 40 maybe more, maybe 100, maybe 150. I don't know what the total will be at the end. It isn't just against the new owners who buy into the responsibility. If you take over a company, you also take over its liability as well as its assets. This is the Qatari royal family, their wealth fund, bought, I think, Harrods for 1.2 billion pounds. They've just rewarded themselves this year with 180 million in terms of dividends. But also the legal action will be against the police and maybe the Crown Prosecution Service, because these accusations do date back historically, apparently to, at the very least, in terms of 1995. This is publicly, because Vanity Fair ran a story about Mohammed Fayed, and there was also, I didn't watch it, it didn't impact on me, I don't know. Maybe it did other comrades. The ITV ran a story called The Big Story. Maybe that's the equivalent of ITV's Panorama, I don't know. But that was in 1997. And the Crown Prosecution Service turned down a complaint by a young woman who says, I was assaulted by Mohammed Fayed when I was 15. So that wasn't pursued. And clearly there were other complaints, and the Crown Prosecution Service didn't put this picture together, or wasn't willing to put this picture together and, make 1 and 1 add up to 2. So we have yet another serial rapist, serial sexual offender who's dead before the truth is revealed. And of course, what I'm thinking of is Jimmy Savile. Remember, I think, wasn't it the Archbishop of Canterbury, when he died, talked about him being a holy fool? Here was someone who regularly visited Mrs. Thatcher in Downing Street as a Christmas guest. But it's noticeable, isn't it, with Mohammed Fayed, that various police individuals, ex-police individuals, are talking about, well, we knew what was the reality. We warned the royal family when Dodi started dating Diana Windsor, and Diana Windsor was going, I don't know, to Paris and Mohammed Fayed's apartments and the yacht and all the rest of it. Jack Straw, Home Secretary of the time, turned down Mohammed Fayed's application for British citizenship on the basis of his dubious character. Now, was this his dubious character because he clung to the end some sort of state conspiracy theory to kill off Diana and Dodi? I don't know, but clearly the secret state knew about him. And for that matter, the police knew about him, the Crown Prosecution Service knew about him, but didn't do anything. So I don't know how successful this legal action will be, but presumably the Qatari royal family has enough to pay damages. But the point I really wanted to make on this story isn't about the flawed character of 1 or 2 bad apples. That's how it's usually portrayed. Or companies not having the right complaints procedure, or, I don't know, the right supervision. I mean, note with, just going to back up the point, note when it came to Fulham Football Club, which he owned, the former manager of the women's team said, we didn't let him near our players. No, he fancied young blondes, and therefore we took measures. Well, they knew, in other words. But my point isn't really about Mohammed Fayed's personality, or Jimmy Savile's, or Harvey Weinstein, or Jeffrey Epstein. My basic argument is, if you get power and you get men, then they will abuse their power. And that doesn't apply to every man, but it applies to enough men to make it a general characteristic. And therefore, the problem is, you could say men, but I would actually argue, no, we don't want to get rid of men. I certainly don't want to get rid of men. but getting rid of powerful men, getting rid of men, who've got pots of money and no supervision over them, no democratization, no control over them. And so we shouldn't be arrogant here and say, oh, this is just a problem for the capitalist class. This is something that would affect the left. Whether it affected the leadership of the Bolshevik Party, I don't know, but we all know surely about Beria. And for every Beria, there must have been countless little Berias in Stalin's Soviet Union. We all know about Mao and China, the hero worship, the personality cult. Well, there are bound to be thousands and thousands of little Maos throughout China. And we know on our existing left tales of Jerry Healy. We know about Comrade Delta. And in my view, for every story we get about rape in the SWP, and I think there were 2, maybe 3, there will be many others where comrades have decided, either out of embarrassment or out of loyalty to the organization, to keep their mouths shut. So I really go back to the work of Radical Anthropology Group and their theory about what made us human, what enabled us to communicate with language as opposed to signals. And the argument is the overthrow of alpha male power, the democratization of alpha male power, and a constant militant anti-elitist, a constant campaign of egalitarianism, that so-called primitive communist society, much better rendered, by the way, as original communist society, put in place. So in terms of the monthly season of hunting, of partying, there is this militant campaign. Anyone who goes around in a cocky manner, any male tempted to show off or to use their strength against other members of the group, is radically put down, is humiliated and asked to join in the joke against themselves. And if they don't join in the joke, they're in trouble. If they join in the joke, they learn a lesson. And I think that we ought to learn that lesson. We still need leadership, unfortunately, in this society, but we don't need gurus. We don't need self-perpetuating central committees and the like. And I know we've got our problems on that score. Anyway, that's my main argument on Fayed and all the rest of it. It isn't bad apples. It's the nature of power itself that we need to tackle. Okay, just moving on. Sir Keir Starmer. Well, didn't we know it? £19,000 worth of trousers and glasses. Well, this isn't really big time corruption, but corruption is built into the parliamentary system. All we needed to know is in the years that Keir Starmer, very short time admittedly, has been in charge of the Labour Party, what you've had is the courtship of the city, courtship of big business men in the main, and money flowing into the shadow cabinet and now the cabinet, and basically buying access of ministers and prime ministers. So in terms of Victoria Starmer, for example, I don't know how much her frocks cost. I don't really know, 500,000 quid. She not only gets a frock, she also gets someone who goes out and buys it for her. This is Lord Ali, who's paying for that. But for every Lord Ali, there will be dozens of others like him that are buying favors and buying influence. And the story that we've been, that's been dominating the news, quite incredible, is the Sue Gray, the advisor, the former civil servant who's in charge of, staff in Downing Street, and the clashes between her and other Downing Street personnel. And the clashes seem to be over, well, they aren't, are they? That she gets paid more than the Prime Minister. Well, loads of civil servants get paid more than the Prime Minister. Interestingly, some journalist um, investigated the journalist who blew the story. And it turns out that he gets paid more than the Prime Minister. So this isn't about the Prime Minister. It's about the sense of entitlement to this class or caste professional politicians, those inside the ministries, but also those clamoring to become MPs and clamoring to become ministers. And they've devoted, haven't they, years as graduates and years as, slumming it, in terms of special advice. And they're basically demanding it's our time to get our snouts in the trough. And so the complaint really isn't so much that Sue Gray gets paid so much. She doesn't actually. It's that they get, comparatively speaking, certainly what they feel they deserve is they get paid too little. Well, the system works, in Britain at least, on not extraordinary levels of pay for professional politicians. It works on the basis if you do your service, you then get your reward. You get your reward after you've left office. So you get onto the board of, I don't know, this top bank or this top company. Just look at, Google. Either way, people like Blair nowadays is not just a multi-millionaire. I'm not saying he's a billionaire, but he will be worth tens of millions. And it's that sort of lifestyle that these people, these professional politicians, basically view as their birthright. So in terms of this new Labour government, it's no different. Of course, it's no different to the last Tory government. It's just that in terms of the last Tory government, it was in office long enough for scandals to accumulate. This government, clearly, the scandals will accumulate because we're dealing with a class or caste of professional politicians who are not in it. I know I'm not telling anyone here anything new. They're not in it for you and me. And I don't mean you and me as you and me. I mean you and me as ordinary punters, ordinary voters. No, they're in it for themselves. They are self-serving, self-interested as a caste, in the same way that if you take professional footballers, they are not the same as your average fan. So you play football for Spurs 1 month, and then you get transferred, and you will play against Spurs the month after. That's the norm. I'm not saying in Britain we see politicians swap about in that way. Nevertheless, the point is there. Lastly, a couple of minutes, just to note the recent elections to the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party. The results have just been announced. This isn't first past the post. So it's not, as it has been in the past, sort of an element of winner takes all. This is some sort of PR system of where you have round after round after round after round of counting, eliminating the lowest candidate to then include them in the other candidate in terms of lists and individuals and all the rest of it. Long and short of it is that the left lost one seat on the NEC. Previously, under the different system, they would have taken everything, or at least most of the seats. Now they're reduced to 3. And what we have is 4 pro-Starmer. This is Labour Win, I think is the name of their faction, and 2 others. And amongst the 2 others is Anne Black, who previously stood for the centre-left grassroots alliance, but was dropped for whatever reason, I don't know. She, I think, came top. She was certainly elected in the first round of counting. And I think the rounds of counting before the final announcement was 21 rounds of counting. Either way, what this shows is while the left has been severely weakened in the Labour Party, and remember, we're talking about constituency Labour parties. So we're talking about rank and file members. We're not talking about affiliated societies, the women's section. We're not talking about the trade unions. We're talking about rank and file individual members. The left has not been eliminated. So yes, severely weakened, but it's still there. And I would have thought myself that Keir Starmer is quite content with this situation at the present time. The NEC only has limited powers. It's the Prime Minister, it's the Parliamentary Labour Party that's crucial. My guess would be that with the connivance of the GMB, Unison, Keir Starmer can get through this Labour Party conference, any rule changes that he wants. I might be wrong, but that's my reading of the situation. So I don't see anything radical happening in the Labour Party. But you might, who knows, get some move to break the link with the trade unions. But I'm extremely sceptical about that. Why break it when it ain't broken? From Keir Starmer's point of view, you know, a strike wave, which I'm not expecting, might change that. A massive Labour defeat, not a total defeat in the next general election, but Labour Party reduced to a position where it has to reach out to the Liberal Democrats as coalition allies, maybe something like that. But as far as I can see, Keir Starmer will be content with the Labour Party he's got at the present time, which means tolerating, at least to some degree, the existence of some kind of left. Now, whether that extends to the Parliamentary Labour Party, we wait and see. Finished there. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks, Jack. To get the ball rolling, perhaps we could ask you a couple of questions on the subject that we advertised, which is the attack on Lebanon by Israel. Now, a lot of newspapers are, up in arms about the threat of a regional war and Iran's role, etc. I mean, it seems unlikely that they will get involved. They have no interest in it. Where do you see the aim of Israel in this attack, and what can communists do in Britain, that goes beyond sort of going in demonstrations and campaigning against arms sales? Where do you see the role of communists there?
Okay, well, what's noticeable, as I said, in terms of Iran and Hezbollah, is the refusal thus far to be provoked. But clearly Israel is doing its damnedest to provoke one or both of them into some sort of war. One would guess with the aim of getting the United States involved. So if Israel can get the United States involved, that would do the job. You could take out, you wouldn't invade Iran, that would be crazy. But you could take out, for example, its nuclear industry with conventional bunker busters, huge bombs with massive explosive power. America could do that. I don't think Israel has been equipped in that way. So that's one thing. What should we do? I'm going to be boring here. I mean, I would defend organizations like Palestine Action. If you're on the jury, if you're writing, but I don't think that's the answer. And I don't, the demonstrations have been great. So the demonstrations in London, the demonstration yesterday in Liverpool, though it wasn't massive, was still impressive and definitely to be welcomed. But actually, the best thing that communists can do, and what communists are surely required to do, is build a communist party, a real communist party. We're not a communist party. There are others that say they're committed to a communist party. Well, I think precisely in the conditions that we're in, of where there's the threat of nuclear war coming out of Russia, I don't take that seriously, but there is drift clearly in terms of mission creep, of where the whole of the Middle East could conceivably, certainly under Trump, be set aflame. Under those conditions, we've actually got to organize to overthrow capitalist governments. And you ain't going to do that with the left in its present state, with a left that believes in the street and strikes. Strikes are great, the street is great, but no, what we need is an alternative government. And we are so far away at the moment, it seems an impossible aim. But we've got to begin with a single step. We've got to take forward what we've got. We've got to gather what we've got in Britain, and for that matter, throughout the world, into something vastly more serious than we've got now. And I'm not just talking about numbers, I'm talking about political understanding.